Dead by Daylight has been the Super Smash Bros. Of the asymmetrical genre since October of 2016 when the shape was introduced to the game. Following Myers' example, we had the introduction of horror titans like Leatherface, Ghostface, Pyramid Head, Nemesis, and Wesker. However, in January 2025, we saw a massive glow up to the original behavior character, Shit Clown, that turned him into the Nightmare, also known as my favorite horror slasher of all time, Freddy Krueger. Since Freddy is the second newest license added to the game, a lot of people don't necessarily understand how he works. Okay, fine, I'll stop with this bit. Can you blame me though? I don't really know how to go about doing this, because I usually make short, to-the-point videos, but this video inherently is going to be something that has a lot of information that I have to cover. I want to start actually with a bit of my credentials when it comes to the character. While I haven't been a creator for a long time, I'm still in my first year. I've been playing Dead by Daylight since July of 2018, and spent a lot of time on Freddy. From the depths of F tier, all the way to the heights he reached in 2019. I never really considered myself a Nightmare main until November of last year, but he was always a favorite of mine. Since the rework, I have put more time into him than any other killer in the cast by far. I have entire streams where I play nothing but Freddy, despite me being a variety killer player. With 6,000 hours in the game, a lot of it has been dedicated to Sharp Hand Joe. I know the killer's add-ons off the top of my head. I have tried out nearly every perk in the game on him at least once, and can play any map to an acceptable level. So, those are my credentials when it comes to making a guide. Next thing I want to talk about is the why are you making a guide for Freddy? He's pretty easy. I think there's a complete misunderstanding between easy to pick up and easy to master. Sure, you can pick Freddy up and spam the Dream Snare and do decently enough against newer survivors, but the little bits of the character that take him to a more powerful level will be completely ignored. Next thing is a disclaimer about power level. There are a lot of people who only play characters if they are strong. This is not Freddy. Don't get me wrong, he's nowhere near the bottom of the tier list, but he is a middle of the pack killer. He resides somewhere in the B tier, which is a perfectly viable and acceptable killer. Do not go into matches with Freddy expecting to dominate teams often. There will be matches where you struggle against survivors who are very prepared for you. However, against most teams, you'll do completely fine. With all this out of the way, if you're still here, I suspect that you're at least mildly interested in learning more about the killer. This video is going to be broken down into sections that you can skip to, but if you're interested in getting the complete picture of the character, sit back, grab a snack, and enjoy. So, we need to begin with the Nightmare at a boiled down level. He is a short killer with a 32 meter tear radius for awake survivors. He moves at the common movement speed of 4.6 meters a second. This makes him on paper your completely average killer. However, Freddy's most important aspect is the dream world. Once a survivor falls asleep, either by being basic attacked by the Nightmare directly or gradually falling asleep over a period of 60 seconds, they will enter the dream world. This sleep period can be further cut down by being tagged by a Dream Snare while awake, which will add 30 seconds to your sleep timer. Survivors will also fall asleep immediately if they are within the radius of an exploding Dream Pallet. Finally, awake survivors caught within an 8 meter radius of Freddy's Dream Projection Teleport will have 15 seconds added to their sleep timer. Once in the dream world, Freddy's tear radius is replaced with a lullaby, and survivors will be given the Oblivious status effect, making Freddy a pseudo-stealth killer. Pinpointing his location in the dream world can be difficult, although do remember that obliviousness doesn't mean that you do not have a red stain. At the same time, the map will become noticeably darker, which helps with attempts to stealth from the Nightmare. Let's now cover the power on a base level. Please note that every aspect of his power can be supplemented with the use of add-ons, but we will not cover those until we reach the add-on section. The Dream Snare is the main aspect of Freddy's new power. You hold down your power button to lift your arm and prepare a projectile. The snare moves at a maximum of 12 meters a second without the usage of add-ons. It can travel 18 meters at maximum range before disappearing. This is the same maximum range of the Death Slinger if you need a reference. Freddy will move at 4 meters a second while charging the snare, setting him at the same movement speed as survivors. There is also a short delay before you can swing when canceling the snare. The snare has the ability to travel up and down surfaces like stairs or hills, but cannot go over holes, such as the basement steps. If it is something that would cause the killer to fall, the snare cannot travel over it. As I mentioned earlier, awake survivors gain 30 seconds of sleep to their timer, And if the survivor is already in the dream world, the survivor will be inflicted with 12% hinder, which will prevent them from fast vaulting windows for the next 4.5 seconds. They will also scream to give an auditory cue to the killer that they were hit by the snare. There's also a distinct audio cue from the snare itself, in case the survivor has a perk like Hardened or Calm Spirit. There's a 7-second cooldown that will be given to the snares, whether the snare is a hit or not, meaning that upon a hit, there will be a 2.5-second time period where the survivor cannot be slowed down. Upon a miss, there will be a hefty 7 seconds at the very least between snares. The way to use the snare on a very basic level is simple. Snare the asleep survivor and then gradually catch up until you get a hit. The snares themselves are not very useful at filler tiles, however become much stronger at something like a T&L wall, and other common tiles that rely on windows. Things that might help you quite a bit in Chase are using your snares on awake survivors to cause them to fall asleep faster. A 7-second cooldown is relatively short, and the trade-off of filling half the sleep timer immediately is absolutely worth it. Remember, having a survivor asleep makes your chase much easier. You can also get directly behind a survivor and throw a snare at them to apply a guaranteed hinder. Once you've done this, you can injure them with your basic attack. Since the hinder is 4.5 seconds long, the survivor will be hindered briefly after their burst of speed ends, so they will gain less distance overall. The snare is not a hit scan ability, so you need to aim where the survivor is going, not where they are. It's very reactable from a distance, so you need to be cautious when using it from range. The next part of the power is Freddy's Dream Pallets. Freddy has 8 Dream Pallets that he can place around the map at any empty pallet spawn that is within 24 meters of the killer. You can also explode any Dream Pallet that is within this same range. The pallets do not immediately explode though. There is a 1.5 second delay where the pallet gives a very clear indication of exploding soon. The rupture radius is 3.5 meters. Any asleep survivor caught within that range will lose a health state. Survivors, though, can drop any Dream Pallet and attempt to stun the Nightmare if he makes a mistake. Survivors, though, are not able to tell that a Dream Pallet is fake until they are within 6 meters of it. You can hold this power up as long as you want without being slowed down, making it an excellent tool to try and bat out a survivor's dead hard. The Rupture is an extremely high skill ceiling ability that can be used to farm Twitter and TikTok clips, but it takes quite a bit of time to learn all the little aspects of the ability. On a very simple level, the way you can use the Dream Pallets for guaranteed value is to use them to zone survivors. It's not exactly the flashiest play, but will always be useful in every match. However, if you're looking for a more interesting way to use the power, there is a very small amount of time where you can actually get a hit with the power, so you have to be on top of it. The way I train myself is to wait for the survivor to be close enough that they can drop the pallet. Once they're in that position, they can't really react to the explosion. There are also some situations where you can force the survivor into a proverbial rock in a hard place by positioning them between a fake pallet and you, by zoning them to the wrong side of the pallet and forcing them to vault a window. You can also hit people through walls on maps if they hug the walls while looping. With practice and muscle memory, you can get some extremely satisfying hits with the power. This does take some time to learn, and while I can give you some general advice on making the ruptures more consistent, you have to naturally learn the timing by practicing the killer. Finally, we have the Dream Projection. This is Freddy's mobility to help him keep up with the pace of the game. Fast chases are one thing, but that is not enough to make a killer powerful. While a good Nightmare can have very fast chases, if he had to simply walk around the map, he would still struggle quite a bit. This power can be heavily altered with add-ons, which we will discuss later on. The way that the Dream Projection works in its most common form is that Freddy will target a selected generator, and after 2.5 seconds he will be teleported to the selected area. Unlike pre-rework, the generators can now be finished without preventing Freddy's teleport. While charging Projection, the Husk of the Nightmare will be revealed in white, showing the player where they will be looking once they appear at the generator. Asleep survivors within an 8 meter radius of the Nightmare will activate Killer Instinct for 3 seconds, giving him enough time to find them and start a chase. Freddy can also teleport to asleep survivors that are healing. He will appear at 8 meters at the closest and 12 meters at the furthest, depending on if there's anything preventing Freddy from appearing at the closest range. The way the Freddy is alerted to the healing survivors that are asleep is a continuous Killer Instinct. The aura of the asleep survivor is revealed, as well as Freddy's Husk. The Nightmare's Dream Projection cooldown is 30 seconds, but is reduced by 15% for each sleeping survivor. This means that it can be brought down by 60%, which means that at maximum, your cooldown will be brought down all the way to 18 seconds. However, strangely enough, teleporting to a healing survivor will not give you a shorter cooldown. While charging the Dream Projection, Freddy moves at 96% movement speed. Survivors will actively gain distance on you during the 2.5 seconds when you charge your projection. The Dream Projection has quite a bit of mind games attached to it. You can fake a teleport to cause a survivor to run back into you, or you can use the teleport to cut a survivor off from where they're pathing. These are both a gamble, because if the survivor understands what it is you're doing, they might guess correctly and win the mind game, meaning you'll lose quite a bit of distance. Mind games like these are a survivor-to-survivor basis. Against stronger survivors, they don't really work out, but less aware survivors will often fall for this and lead to a quick down. Alarm clocks are the survivor's counterplay to Freddy, and break him from being borderline oppressive into extremely manageable if you have good clock usage. Clocks are scattered around the map and highlighted to asleep survivors. Survivors who interact with any clock will enter what I cleverly call gold mode for the next 30 seconds, meaning that they are completely immune to your snares, pallets, and sleep gained from teleports. Once those 30 seconds are up, the sleep timer will start as usual. I know there's a lot that I just threw at you, but trust me, it sounds a lot more complicated than it actually is. However, what I want to talk about next is probably the best parts of Freddy right now, and that are his techs. Now, for those who don't know, a tech is basically something that players with more information can do to catch unsuspecting players off guard. They're usually on killers like the Blight or the Ghoul, stuff like that, but Freddy has two of them that I think you really need to know about. Like I said, not many techs have been discovered, but any that I do find or someone else finds, I will put in the comments section. However, I want to talk about two of his most important tools that you can use to put yourself in an extremely good position. If you're watching this in the future, there's a chance that this may have been patched out. The first one I talk about is snare shoving. You're seeing this on screen right now. This is something that Freddy can do to push the survivor out of his way in order to prevent a body block. This is incredibly strong and can be used to tunnel survivors ruthlessly. There really is nothing survivors can do to prevent this beyond having multiple survivors in the area to take a hit for the person that Freddy has targeted. Keep in mind that Freddy needs to be extremely close to the survivor that he is attempting to shove out of the way, or else the survivor's collision will return before you can make it to the other side. This next one is something that takes a lot of practice to pull off consistently. I can't even really do it yet and I play him a lot, but it leads to guaranteed hits with your rupture pallets. I personally like to call it pallet karma. The survivor drops the dream pallet and the dream pallet drops them. I do want to say, in the gameplay in the background, the survivor that I'm doing this with is golden, meaning they can't fall asleep. So basically, Freddy will rupture the pallet right before the survivor drops it, meaning that the survivor will drop the pallet, but the pallet will still explode and guarantee a hit due to the survivor being stuck in the range of the pallet. The way you can tell this works is when the survivor drops the pallet, if it still has the explosion effect, then it worked. Also, I didn't really have anywhere else to fit this, but Freddy can snare survivors off an unhook and force it to cancel the animation. If you do it well, it just entirely denies the unhook. It's very strong, very similar to what Doctor can do until that gets patched out in a couple weeks. Now that we've covered his power and some of the techs that you can do, I want to cover how you generally want to loop with Freddy. The killer most similar to him is, of course, the Clown. However, unlike Clown, Freddy doesn't really thrive in actual loops. Generally speaking, most loops are short enough for a survivor to make it to safety before Freddy can stop them. The exception to this is a TNL wall. Generally, any tile where a window is the main resource for a survivor, Freddy can perform pretty decently. However, Freddy is extremely effective at downing survivors who are in between loops. While the whole W meme is a genuinely very strong playstyle for survivors, Freddy is able to play well against this by using his snare in between loops to close distance between survivors and himself. Once at a proper loop, Freddy mostly has to play as an M1 killer. You can still use the snare to hinder survivors, and honestly, you probably should, but they will almost certainly still make it back to the pallet. However, this will force them to drop the pallet much sooner. When it comes to windows, Freddy is generally strong against these. He can force survivors to medium vault if they are hit with a snare before they start the vault animation. If close enough, you can snag a cheeky hit that you wouldn't have been able to get in most other situations. Freddy is a slightly more effective M1 killer in loops. His weaknesses against pallets is somewhat offset by his strength against windows when played well. I'll talk about this more in the perks section of the video, but perks like Brutal Strength, Enduring, or Fire Up can be used to cover up for some of his weaker spots. In most situations, one good snare is enough to force the pallet to be dropped. Some stronger tiles like shack or main buildings can be a bit of a struggle and require some mind games to get through them. You can also use fake pallets in an attempt to get cheeky hits against survivors who hug walls tightly. They can be hit through some walls, and not only main buildings, but certain buildings in general, as you saw earlier on. At this point, I want to cover each one of Freddy's add-ons, one by one, to give you a look at which ones you should use. Fortunately, Freddy isn't very reliant on his add-ons. They don't change very much about his power. He has a very good power as is. The add-ons only slightly increase the power. Let's start with the S tier, with the 4 best add-ons to use. Any combination of these add-ons will be a good pick. The Jump Rope. This is the Nightmare's best add-on. It's an incredibly simple one that increases his hinder from 4.5 seconds to 5 seconds. While this doesn't sound like much, the additional half a second has much more than one use case. It can be used to simply slow the survivor down and have a longer effect. It can be used right before hitting a healthy survivor to keep them hindered for longer after the off-hit burst. The extra half a second can do a lot, and it is really felt quite a bit. Next we have Pill Bottle. This add-on has more than one use case later in the game. At the start of the match, you'll be getting substantially less value, but after survivors have woken up a few times, the next time the survivor falls asleep by microsleep, or in simpler terms, passively falling asleep, at maximum power, the survivor will fall asleep within 30 seconds instead of the usual 60 seconds. This makes it much more likely for a single snare to immediately put a survivor into the dream world, instead of needing multiple if you cannot just get the hit. It also makes survivors need to go and wake themselves up much more often, which is free slowdown. Nancy's Sketch. This add-on is very strong against survivors who are good at the counterplay. Survivors who wake up with a clock will now fall asleep in 24 seconds instead of the default 30. Over time, this saves you more and more time. Pairing this with an add-on like the Pill Bottle, especially, will make Freddy's Dream World juggling much better. And the last add-on we have in the S tier is the Z block. This is a very simple one. It just shows you the aura of survivors for 3 seconds after you hit them with a snare or a fake pallet. This can be increased with Lethal Pursuer, but it's generally pretty simple and it gives you decent value. We're now into the A tier. These are still very strong add-ons, but not quite good enough to rest into the S tier. First we have the Garden Rake. This one was nearly in the S tier due to just how consistent it is. The small 10% size increase will lead to more successful hits with the snare than you'd expect from a common add-on. This is incredible value for such a cheap add-on. Next we have is the Outdoor Rope. This is best used when throwing your snares from a bit of a distance to make them more difficult to react to. Not really much to add past that, it's just another very consistent add-on that you can use if you want to instead of one of the S tier picks. Class Photo. This is an extremely transformative add-on that adds an entirely new aspect to Freddy's dream projection. You can now, in addition to all generators and healing survivors, teleport to exit gates throughout the game. On top of that, survivors who are actively opening an exit gate will now have Killer Instinct while doing so. This add-on is very strong for an in-game build, but outside of that, there's not that much value. The Unicorn Block. This is an add-on I severely underrated for a long time. Still, it's not the best choice for Freddy, but it's incredibly fun and strong enough to be a worthwhile pick. This adds half a meter to your rupture radius, which will lead to you getting more hits with the Dream Pallets. The issue is that the rupture is not the biggest part of Freddy's power, and unlike Jump Rope, which adds half a second to the hinder duration, you'll be getting less hits due to Unicorn Block. Still a fun and solid pick nonetheless. We're now in the B tier. From here on out, the add-ons become less effective. The Green Dress. The Green Dress adds an additional 2 seconds to survivors waking up. While extra slowdown is always nice, an additional 2 seconds doesn't really cover as much as you'd think it would, especially when you have so many add-ons already that are extremely solid. The Prototype Claw. This is a feel-good add-on more than anything else. It reduces the charge speed of your Dream Snare by 10%, which feels very good, but is generally not worth running due to the value being so small and it being the only effect. If this had a secondary effect, the add-on might be able to slide into the A tier. Next we have the Paint Thinner. This is yet another very transformative add-on to the Dream Projection, however, provides much less value than the Class Photo does. Against survivors who are very smart and drop your fake pallets outside of chase, you'll get a bit more value, but against survivors who don't do this, the likelihood of getting this to work is much lower, especially when you consider that survivors are given a warning that you have the add-on. Generally not worth using, although it could be good to get it down on a survivor who isn't paying attention. Next we have the Wool Shirt. It's a very simple add-on that removes a small bit of the delay before a Dream Pallet explodes once activated. It's not something you'll get value out of super often, but when you do, it feels very good. You can pair this with the Unicorn Block to make your Dream Pallets noticeably stronger, at the expense of having a weaker snare. Now we're into the C tier. This is the point where the add-ons begin to provide less and less value, to a point where you're making things more difficult for yourself than you really need to. They either provide a very small effect, or more commonly require very specific situations to be useful. The Nancy's Masterpiece. This add-on removes 3 seconds from your Dream Projection every time you hit a survivor with a snare or a rupture pallet. There's definitely a bit of value here, but the requirement of hitting a snare or rupture is what holds it back. Your snares already have a 7-second cooldown, meaning you can hit 2 snares on average to get your projection back 6 seconds sooner. Like I said, it's not hard to hit snares, but this is just more trouble than it's worth. The Red Paintbrush. This add-on on paper seems very strong. However, the downside puts you into a spot you have almost no other option but to run the Pill Bottle, and that only makes it somewhat decent. The added information of survivors outside of a 32-meter radius being revealed to you in the dream world is very nice, but the likelihood of this actually happening is taken down quite a bit when you consider that survivors have alarm clocks that they can use immediately to wake themselves up to escape the dream. They also have teammates who can do the same. Without a fully powered pill bottle, this add-on is actively detrimental, and the information you're given could easily be replaced with barbecue and chili or floods of rage. The cat block. This used to be one of Freddy's best add-ons before his rework, but it's now such a small effect that I wouldn't ever suggest using it. This reduces the dream projection cooldown from 30 seconds to 27 seconds, and that's it. Sure, you can teleport the generators a little faster, but generally speaking, the time it takes to chase and hook will be enough to recharge your power, especially if there are survivors asleep. Super unnecessary add-on, but there is a small benefit. The black box. This is a very gimmicky add-on, much like the class photo, but unlike the class photo, it provides actually zero value outside of the in-game, and even the value provided during the in-game isn't enough to make it a good pick. Outside of full in-game builds, this will very rarely give you a sneaky kill. The 15-second timer is pitiful, and if you're looking for an in-game build, I suggest class photo with no way out for much better results. We're now in the D tier. The next add-ons we have here are very, very bad. However, they aren't actively detrimental. The effect of these will never be felt, and you should avoid using them unless you have literally nothing else. First, we have the Kids Drawing. This add-on provides a measly 10% boost to all of the micro-sleep added by use of your dream abilities. Since a rupture will immediately put a survivor to sleep, this add-on does not benefit rupture at all. As for the snare and the projection, I've done the math, and this adds roughly 3 extra seconds to a survivor's timer, moving a snare's added time from 30 seconds to 33. As for the dream projection, it'll add a whopping 1.5 seconds to the dream projection's sleep timer, bringing it from 15 seconds to 16.5. This add-on is laughably bad, but again, not actively detrimental. Next we have the sheet block. With some number buffs, this add-on could be very oppressive, I think. So on one hand, I'm glad that Behavior decided to play it safe. However, it does mean that the sheet block lands at the bottom of the non-detrimental add-ons for Freddy. This add-on will increase the cooldown for the alarm clocks from 45 seconds to 49.5. This applies only to the one clock that was used and none of the others on the map, meaning survivors have multiple other clocks they can interact with to wake up. Like I mentioned, with a few number tweaks, this add-on could be pretty solid, but as of right now, it sits at the bottom of the barrel. We're now into the F tier. Freddy has 2 add-ons that are actively detrimental, and you should never go out of your way to use them unless you're just messing around. It's worth noting that one of these is meant to be a weak add-on. So let's start off with the swing chains. On paper, this has a very strong effect. However, once you realize that it only triggers once the teleport has been completed, and the radius is only 16 meters, you'll see that this add-on is extremely hard to get any use out of. If the add-on activated as soon as Freddy started the teleport, it could be used with the intended effect, as well as a sort of cruel limits while you're in chase with someone else in order to prevent them from making a window. It has the potential to be a very good add-on. Unfortunately, in its current state, it's just not worth using ever. And finally, the creme de la creme, the blue dress. This is Freddy's meme add-on. It reverts the nightmare to his former kit, pre-rework. You have one stationary stair that has to essentially be dropped right beneath the survivor in order to affect them. After 8 seconds, the snare disappears. Genuinely terrible to use this. This is every add-on ranked. If you want to see a visual, here's a tier list. Now that we've covered all of his add-ons, I want to move into the perk section. Instead of covering every perk in the game and having you here for 4 hours, I'm going to simply bring up some good pills that you can try out. If you want to see every perk ranked though, here you go. Feel free to pause and give it a look. Most of the perks I'm going to talk about will be in the high tier, as well as some of the perks in the interesting case area. We'll also generally cover the perks in the lower tiers to explain what it is that makes most of them so especially bad for Freddy. So let's now cover what it is that makes most of the perks in the high tier so useful and or synergize with Freddy's kit well. If there are any perks that I don't cover directly and you want to know more about them, feel free to ask in the comments or join the Discord server or Twitch chat and ask me there. Let's begin talking about most of the generator perks in the top tier. This one really is a given. Generator slowdown is unfortunately something that Dead by Daylight at this point in its lifespan is balanced around. Perks like Pain Resonance and Corrupt Intervention are strong picks on every killer. Surge is pretty strong on killers who have to use their basic attack to get it down. Freddy falls under this umbrella. However, these perks actually take a backseat to a different type of gen defense when it specifically is about the nightmare. Kick perks. Perks like Pop Goes the Weasel, Eruption, Oppression, and Dragon's Grip will see added use cases due to Freddy being able to immediately teleport to a generator and apply these perks to that generator. However, I would not recommend running these 4 perks together. You'll be able to defend your generators, but to get real value out of any of them, you need to get downs. Freddy really benefits from chase perks as well. The main one that I always recommend to people is Rapid Brutality. With the way that the Nightmare's power works, he'll very rarely get Bloodlust as is, so the trade-off of a 5% haste boost is absolutely worth it. Pair this with the hinder from his Dream Snare, and Freddy will catch up much faster to injured survivors, leading to fast downs. This can be further amplified with perks like Brutal Strength, my personal favorite, Say the Best for Last, or Bamboozle, in order to quickly end chases to keep pressure on survivors. The main synergies you'll see in the top tier is Generator Defense, Information, or Chase perks. Freddy uses all of these very well. Moving to the worst perks, you'll notice that most of these are related to Terror Radius, which immediately should be setting off red flags. Freddy wants to keep people asleep as much as he can. Asleep survivors are given the Oblivious status effect, meaning they do not hear the Terror Radius as is, however, will hear your lullaby. Perks like Distressing, Overwhelming Presence, and Unnerving Presence, and sadly enough, Disillusion, just do not work with him. However, you may have noticed if you looked at the tier list, there are a few exceptions to this. Dark Devotion and Unforeseen do not remove your Terror Radius, they simply move it elsewhere, meaning that awake survivors will still hear a Terror Radius, which can throw them off. However, Freddy will be able to hit some sneaky hits on them. Another benefit of this, and in my opinion the biggest, is that you now will not have a red stain, so survivors in the dream world have even more issues detecting where you are. These 2 perks are very good at confusing the survivor team and leading to situations where you can scare them, which is always funny, and get a free hit in the process. While these 2 perks aren't something I would recommend to starters, they can be used by more experienced killer players to confuse and conquer the survivor team. Trail of Torment is similar to the other 2 perks I just mentioned, however, a bit less successful at doing so. This is meant to stop survivors who are awake from hearing you coming, especially since asleep survivors are already struggling to pinpoint you. It's not as effective as Unforeseen due to survivors being shown the generator that's causing you to have no Terror Radius, however, it can still be used to sneak up on survivors that are awake. Machine Learning has pretty good synergy with Freddy, despite what you may think. You struggle to get full value out of the perk, but 10% haste for 45 seconds is a very solid effect. On top of that, we have the confusing undetectable that we talked about earlier, and also Freddy's snares slowing survivors down. It really is a very strong combo. And now that it's been confirmed by Behavior themselves that the haste stacking is not going to be removed next patch, you can bring Machine Learning and Rapid Brutality together and be 15% faster after a hit. Very strong. Definitely worth trying. And finally, and in my opinion the most interesting in terms of Freddy, is Face the Darkness. The way Face the Darkness works for most killers is, after you hit a survivor, survivors outside of your Terror Radius will begin screaming intermittently every 25 seconds. However, asleep survivors do not have a Terror Radius. This means that no matter where they are on the map, any survivor that's asleep will be intermittently screaming every 25 seconds while Face the Darkness is up. Very fun perk, very good information for Freddy. On screen right now, I'm going to have an example of this in case you don't quite understand what it is I'm talking about. So as you can see, despite standing right next to me, Face the Darkness still made Quentin scream. It's a pretty fun perk. It's still a hex, so it's a bit risky, but I like it a lot, and I think you should try it out once you have a bit more experience with the character. Now that we've briefly covered some of Freddy's best perks, and as well as explained why so many perks are just an avoided at all costs for Freddy, I'm going to show you the tier list one more time so you can take another look at it, and then we're going to move on to the next section of the video. We're getting close to the end, and quickly I just want to cover the general concept of maps. Generally speaking, he doesn't have many bad maps. At the same time, he doesn't have many good maps either way. He can play the vast majority of matches extremely well. Maps that are extremely pallet dense can be difficult due to survivors simply pre-dropping. The same can be said with maps that don't have a lot of empty pallet spawns from the beginning, like Leary's Memorial Institute. Although, the biggest offenders are the maps with very strong tiles, like Garden of Joy or Badham Preschool. Thankfully, he's pretty similar to Wraith in the way he can just play most maps. Some maps that he is very good on are both variations of the RPD, the Shattered Square, Ormond Lake Mine, and Haddonfield. These maps are either extremely killer side in the case of Haddonfield, have a lot of pallet spawns close together where one could be replaced with a fake pallet in the case of RPD, Ormond Lake Mine is extremely new and very killer sided, and in the case of Shattered Square, a lot of the pallets on the map are set in areas where survivors struggle to dodge the rupture. This section of the guide is so short because, as I just said, Freddy doesn't really struggle on many maps that other killers would struggle on. Your teleport and your snare are enough to have consistent mobility and chase tools to make the vast majority of maps playable. We're starting to get towards the end, and I want to briefly talk about working within your counters. With Freddy being a mid-tier character, his counterplay is very strong, I'm not gonna lie. Survivors waking up the clocks turns you into a pure M1 killer with literally no power. However, there are some things that can be done in this situation to try and deal with this. Obviously, the biggest thing you can do is bring add-ons to greatly weaken survivors that wake up. Pill Bottle and Nancy's Sketch will make survivors waking up less effective. However, in-game, the wake-up action can actually be interrupted. However, just for full clarity, I won't be talking about how to counter survivors waking each other up, because this is genuinely a nothing burger when it comes to countering Freddy. The main thing is survivors using the alarm clock to wake themselves up. As I said earlier in the video, each clock has a 45-second cooldown after being used, meaning that that specific clock can't be used again for nearly a minute. Truth be told, in most situations, survivors will be able to wake up, however, there are a handful of ways to interrupt them. First, and most obviously, is simply interrupting them with a basic attack. However, you can also do this with a snare, which will interrupt the action and cause them to scream. Remember that if a survivor does fall asleep with the clock, there is nothing that can be done to cause them to fall asleep during that 30-second duration. Once it ends, the normal rules of the micro-sleep mechanics are active again. Now, I want to briefly cover how Freddy plays against the Survive with Friends. This, genuinely, is where he starts to struggle a bit. Against solo survivors or lower skilled players, Freddy can perform well, but when it comes to Survive with Friends that are coordinated, they can destroy a lot of Freddy's tools, mostly the ruptures. Survivors can communicate which pallets were thrown in order to prevent teammates from falling for any fake pallets. However, Freddy can use this to his advantage by moving around his dream pallets continuously. Against a Survive with Friends, your best tool is to make use of his techs I mentioned earlier to get a lot of early pressure. Always remember that Survive with Friends often fall apart by being extremely altruistic. You can use that to your advantage. It'll be much more challenging than the solo team, but nowhere near unbeatable. While Freddy is nowhere near the top of the tier list, he is an extremely rewarding and fun killer. He is strong enough to consistently win his matches if you learn him. With extremely good add-ons across the board and a lot of perk synergy, it leads to gameplay that can revitalize your love for the game, like it did for me. I just want to add on, this is my biggest project so far. The pinned comment in this video will hopefully stay updated with all and any changes to Freddy in the coming months to years. I worked pretty hard on this and spent a lot of time making it into the behemoth it ended up becoming. Like I said earlier, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments, or if you want a more direct route to me, you can join the community Discord server or come into my Twitch chat while I'm live. I will gladly answer any Freddy related questions. If you enjoyed this or learned something new, you can help me out by liking and subscribing. This is not my normal content, but it's something I got very passionate about making since the rework in January. Now that we're here at the end, there's nothing left to say other than this. My name's Kassir, and I'll see you in the dream world. Bye-bye. Oh, it was so much.
Fuck you, bitch.